You want hope? A post, a text, a poem, and a wee sermon. A post. The phone rings. You answer it automatically, not thinking of anything in particular because you weren't doing anything in particular. It was just a day, just a regular moment that you were living through, without consciousness even. However, the voice on the phone tells you death has entered your life. Now, everything is different. An invisible pall has covered you and everything around you. You're in shock, not feeling until you do, and then it's a knife wound deep. Grief takes over because you cannot hurt that deeply for very long and still function. In fact, other people in your life, less devastated, usher you from one moment to the next, through the day, through the days, through the weeks, as long as it takes for you to be able to process ordinary daily decisions again. You live in a shroud, covered by grief. You hate it, and you want the grief to disappear somehow. And yet, it's also protecting you too. The disassociation just comes over you suddenly. And you now live outside yourself and watch each moment of day pass slowly, keeping you from feeling how much it hurts that death has ripped that person that you love away. Grief keeps you from understanding what it will be like not to have that love, that touch, that voice in your life ever again. Pain. The pain comes in waves, sometimes a single stab from some memory or association with the one now gone. But grief allows you to breathe and to walk heavily through the minutes. You know the experience I'm talking about, of course. The avalanche of grief that buries us for a time. It may have come from a life-threatening or life-changing diagnosis, yours or one of those ones who you love the most. Grief isn't limited to visitation by death. So, one of the most universal experiences within grief is that bizarre sensation that comes from realizing that the whole world is just going along as if everything was normal. As if nothing had happened. How could your world be so completely devastated and changed? But people all around you are shopping, going to work and to school, eating ice cream, walking the dog. It feels both maddening and interesting. A kind of tickle of curiosity, sort of, about how such a split screen can exist. The circus. There's got to be at least 100 million people or more caught beneath the pall of grief, wondering how life can go on as if nothing had happened. Those of us horrified by Donald Trump and the circus act that he deploys to ruin people's lives, sending wrecking balls through century-old institutions that were actually working well, and otherwise threatening freedom, democracy, and international friendships. It is horrendous, and yet people are still doing ordinary things, like going to work, walking the dog, still eating ice cream. Yeah, an August Economist YouGov poll had 56% of adult U.S. citizens that strongly or somewhat strongly disapproved of Trump. Mostly they strongly disapproved. That's roughly 144 million people. In fact, people with strong feelings about Trump comprised 70% of the current adult population. 47% strongly disapprove, while only 23% strongly approve. That's 121 million adult citizens in some stage of grief, bewilderment about how everything around them could be going on as if normal, when normal has been eaten alive. Today, the sun was shining. It was smiling down from a cloudless blue sky, gliding its rays along the top of the lake where I live, all of it radiating freshness. I watched people running and bicycling as if nothing were different. In fact, I walked the dog and sat down with my computer as if nothing were different. Yet, like so many millions of Americans who share this space, some part of me was screaming that this can't be happening. Well, this podcast, isn't about fixing it. I don't have that kind of magic or spiritual power. That's about what this is about, rather, is recognizing and understanding that pall that is over our lives so that we can be empowered to act. The circus, you see, has a strategy to keep the shocks coming, to keep us destabilized and grieved. We have to treat each new outrage as a flash bomb or a noise grenade. Duck if you have to, but try not to react. The circus wants to capture and direct our attention, but we have to assert control over it, over what we see and what we think and what we do. Faith. It's an odd and twitchy space we inhabit, isn't it? You know that you are the majority. Safety in numbers, right? You know what's happening is wrong in so many places and in so many ways, and yet our system of checks and balances should be steadying it, right? You know what the future will be if nothing changes, right? You have faith, but it's not helping you in your grief and trauma, right? Wrong. Faith does not inhabit despair. Faith does not inhabit despair. I have sometimes, and am sometimes, an inhabitant of that darkness in which wishful thinking is a dim bulb that we know in our heart of hearts doesn't really have any power behind it. It is not a space in which authentic faith resides. Trusting God is not believing that God will restore everything to the way that it was when we were happiest. No. Faith is defined by holding on to the knowledge that whatever happens and however the moment ends, it is God's earth and God's cosmos. It is God who reigns, not us. And the love of God endures through time and space in a way that human beings just have no inkling about. Listen up. The pre-Trump America is not coming back. No, it's not coming back. It's gone. A piece of candy taken right out of our hands. Mostly, it is the loss of our liberal myths about America, of a time and a place that really only existed for the privileged, educated classes. That angry 23% was angry at us for a reason and put their trust in a despicable human being like Trump because they thought we were even more despicable. We had no clue. Even the people we supposed we were championing thought we were despicable. And that's an ironic bit of humor to remember and hold on to. Now, Jeremiah comes to mind for me and is a potent bit of hope to remember. In fact, Jeremiah reminds us of what hope really is and what it looks like. That brilliant scholar and prophet Walter Brueggemann, who I've mentioned so many times before, reminds us via Jeremiah that faith consists of an imagination that can host a world grounded in the hope of the holy, of loving kindness, naming evil, walking in humility as we build and rebuild the kingdom of God on earth as in heaven. I recently listened to the Working Preacher podcast 001 from May 6th, 2021, with an elderly Brueggemann as its guest. Listening to him reminded me of what I knew but had forgotten for myself. It made me realize that not preaching is dangerous for me. A text. The book of Jeremiah describes the trauma of losing the familiar, the trauma of losing the familiar. For Jeremiah's contemporaries in the 5th century BCE, it was the experience of the Babylonian exile. It was the loss of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. Even more than the place, though, it was loss of a whole framework or a frame of reference in which they believed that God had given them the holy city and the nation. So no one could take it away from them, right? One response to trauma is violence. An eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. Even annihilation of the offender, if possible. And yet Brueggemann reminds us that in none of Jeremiah's 6 laments over the loss of Jerusalem an exile into Babylon, does he ever go for violence. To exiles, he says, plant gardens, have children. Seek the shalom of Babylon, because if they prosper, so will you. It's crazy, mind-boggling to consider. In Jeremiah 29, he writes a final letter to the exiles who have been captured and taken back to Babylon to live. Jerusalem has been destroyed, it's rubble. The exiles are traumatized, they're grieving, bewildered, in shock, and unable to decide what to do. Anger and bitterness, along with disorientation and disassociation, fill their confused bodies as they struggle to survive through the haze. Now here's where Brueggemann can be his most brilliant. He holds up an ancient text in proximity to our contemporary situation and almost doesn't need to say anything else. Brueggemann points out that Jeremiah calls on the exiles in the midst of their extreme grief to leave behind what they treasured. Leave it behind. Jesus, he reminds us, echoes Jeremiah 500 years later when he tells his disciples to leave their treasures behind and follow him.
Hope by Liesl Mueller. It hovers in dark corners before the lights are turned on. It shakes sleep from its eyes and drops from mushroom gills. It explodes in the starry heads of dandelions turned sages. It sticks to the wings of green angels that sail from the tops of maples. It sprouts in each occluded eye of the many-eyed potato. It lives in each earthworm segment, surviving cruelty. It is the motion that runs from the eyes to the tail of a dog. It is the mouth that inflates the lungs of the child that has just been born. It is the singular gift we cannot destroy in ourselves, the argument that refutes death, the genius that invents the future, all we know of God. It is the serum which makes us swear not to betray one another. It is in this poem trying to speak.
Hope resides in an extreme act of faithfulness that enters into the unknown ahead, not in recovery of the past. Hope, when it comes to the reign of God, is never in recovery of the past, but always about investing in the unknown future with vigor and with trust. What Brueggemann takes away from all of this is that Jeremiah faithfully describes the world as it is, not wishful thinking. Ironically, Brueggemann points out that when one is a faithful truth teller, suddenly hope wells up. It just bubbles up in ways and for reasons we don't even understand. And telling the truth and looking at it, hope rises up. It reminded me of an earlier moment in the book of Jeremiah when the king has Jeremiah thrown down a deep well and abandoned there. It was a vain attempt to shut him up. The king and his cohort of hired prophets couldn't stand to hear Jeremiah telling the truth about what was happening. The king is trying to prop up, you see, a corporate delusion, and Jeremiah, he keeps revealing that it's wishful thinking. Now, it looks bad for Jeremiah, and it looks bad for Jerusalem and Judah. By all rights, he should give up and escape the mayhem to come, right? Instead, he calls a relative to come to visit him in his deep prison and asks that relative if he could please buy a piece of land from him. Jeremiah, instead of fearing, instead of escaping, invests in the future. While in prison, without knowing what will happen or how it will all turn out. A wee sermon. In the year 627 BCE, a child or youth named Jeremiah felt the current running through his life, and the current reached up from under the surface and pulled the boy into its depths. "Help! Help!" he cried in desperation and in the fear of drowning. "Relax. Move with me," the voice assured. "Be not afraid." The boy had no way to know, because he was just a boy, that Ashurbanipal was about to die. Who was Ashurbanipal, you might ask? He was the last strong emperor of the violent Assyrian Empire that controlled their known world at that particular moment. In other words, the world as it was known and had been known was about to change dramatically. It would be more earth-shattering than the failure of the Maginot Line, than the fall of the Berlin Wall, than the fall of the Twin Towers. Within the lifetime of that little boy, his own nation would fall, his own city would be destroyed, his own temple would be burned, his own people would be exiled, his own family would be enslaved, his own religion would have its very promise raped. Even its very God, the one who called to the boy, who would be revealed as powerless, and the once eternal promises appear to be only lies, that God. When the current in the river of his life tells the boy that he was called even before he was formed and consecrated even before he was born, it means that without that boy, the history of the world would unravel. Upon that little boy rested the cosmos, the very orbit of planets and stars, not to mention nations and peoples. Now, Walter Brueggemann has observed that with passionate understatement, that without the prophecies of Jeremiah, that would deliver to his people, that the succeeding generations of Judeans who were exiled and enslaved in Babylon would never have had the theological metaphors and visions with which to comprehend their current Holocaust. And thus they would not have been empowered to eventually move beyond it and to recover. Without Jeremiah there at that moment in history, Judaism may well have vanished. And you say, so what? But Judaism, Christianity, and Islam would have vanished. They all rested upon that boy's decision to enter into the current of his life, because otherwise, even the idea of Israel would have disappeared like the Hittites before them. Is it historical accident that Jeremiah was there to plant the seed of recovery at that particular moment of destruction, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if it was a direct act of God or a historical accident. The truth of that moment remains the same. Upon one boy rotated the universe. That's all that needs to be said. Upon one child rotated the universe. An entire universe of possibilities. A veritable cosmos of orbiting lives rested upon one small boy, and also rests upon your small life and mine. Hear me now, please. The current of your life is calling you. It is reaching up and pulling you down, and you may even think that you're drowning. But the turbulence in life is not death. Someone, perhaps a whole nation of someone's, rests upon you entering into the depths and moving with the current of your life. To imagine the hope of the holy, we must let go of whatever it is we're grieving. We must say goodbye to what we have lost. That which we treasured, if ever it was, is gone now and will not return. There is yet hope. But hope is not in what was. The hope is in what will be as we build and rebuild the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. How and when we will see it is not known, and probably will never be known by us. But the hope is not in recovery, it is in living into and going to the next place, our hands held in the hand of God. Thank you for being here. Peace be with you.